The Wolfless Omega was attacked in the back room until the Alpha King walked in at worst moment. Did you see the way he looked at the hors d'oeuvres? Like he wanted to murder the puff pastry. Daphne, hush. That is King Malric. He looks at everyone like he wants to murder them. It is his resting face. Well, if he looks at me like that, I might just die of happiness. Or terror. It's a fine line tonight, isn't it, Celestria? Focus. We aren't here for the king. We are here to make sure a certain little problem in the kitchen doesn't ruin the evening. Is the Westgrave heir in position? Niall. He's been in the reserve wine cellar for 20 minutes, waiting for his prey. Lorien Driftwood was not a person. She was a function. In the rigid, bone-deep hierarchy of the Silver Moon Pack, you were defined by what you could turn into. If you could shift into a massive timber wolf with teeth like daggers, you were a soldier, revered and feared. If you were a sleek runner with silver fur, a messenger, vital and swift, even the runts had a place, a pack connection that bound them to the collective soul. But if you were Lorien, 22 years old with a spine that refused to crack and shift, and a spirit that remained stubbornly, isolatingly human, you were nothing. You were wolfless, an omega by default, not by biology, but by the pity of the council and the disdain of the elite. She was a glitch in the genetic code, a silence in a world of howling noise. She stood in the chaotic, steam-filled kitchen of the Gilded Claw, the Pack's premier event hall, polishing a silver tray until her distorted reflection stared back. Her eyes, a startling, defiant violet, were the only thing about her that held colour. The rest of her was muted, ash-blonde hair pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun, a uniform of dull grey wool that scratched at her neck and seemed designed to merge with the stone walls. Driftwood. The bark of the head chef, a boar of a man named Cale, made the silverware rattle on the prep tables. Stop admiring yourself. You're scaring the silverware. The VIP reserve needs the 1945 blood vintage. Now. Lorien didn't flinch. Flinching triggered the predators. It was a scent of weakness they craved like sugar. She simply set the rag down, her movements precise and economical. The 1945 is in the locked cellar, chef. Only management has the key. You know I'm not cleared for Section D. And that is why the manager gave me this. Kyle tossed a heavy, iron key onto the stainless steel table. It slid across a patch of duck grease and stopped mere inches from her fingertips. Mr. Westgrave specifically requested it. He's hosting the King's inner circle. Don't embarrass us, Driftwood, or I'll have you scrubbing the latrines with a toothbrush for a month. And I'll make sure it's the soldier's latrine. Lorien picked up the key. It was cold, heavier than it looked, biting into her palm. A shiver, irrational and sharp, walked down her spine. Westgrave. Niall Westgrave was the beta heir, a man whose smile was as sharp as a scalpel and just as sterile. He had never noticed her before. She was part of the furniture to men like him. Why would a man who spent his weekends hunting rogue bears care about the Omega who poured the wine? He asked for the 1945, Lorien clarified, her voice low. That bottle costs more than my life. Then don't drop it, Kyle sneered, turning back to his source. Go, and take the service tunnels. Guests don't want to see the help. She moved through the service corridors, the thrum of the bass from the ballroom vibrating through the floorboards like a giant rhythmic heartbeat. The Gilded Claw was a masterpiece of architecture. High-vaulted ceilings, velvet drapes the color of fresh blood, and chandeliers that dripped crystal like frozen tears. But the service halls were the veins, hidden, ugly, and smelling of damp concrete and old secrets. As she passed the narrow slat of the entrance to the main ballroom, she paused. Through the crack, she caught a glimpse of the festivities. It was the winter solstice gala. Furs, diamonds, and the overwhelming, heady scent of musk and amber that rolled off the high-ranking wolves. It was a sea of power, a room full of apex predators preening in silk. In the center of the room, standing like a monolith in a sea of flowing fabric, was King Malric Heartfall. He was terrifying. He wasn't dancing. He wasn't drinking. He was standing perfectly still, his tuxedo straining against shoulders that seemed too broad for civilized clothing. His hair was black as a raven's wing, swept back but messy enough to suggest he had run his hands through it in frustration. His eyes, dark, abyssal pools, scanned the room, bored, lethal, and detached. He looked like a tiger trapped in a cage made of gold, waiting for an excuse to bite the bars. For a second, just a fraction of a heartbeat, Lorien felt a pull, a strange, magnetic tug in her chest, like a hook catching on a rib. It wasn't the pack bond. She didn't have that. It was something else. Gravity. Malric's head snapped toward the service door. His gaze drilled through the wood, through the shadows, straight to where she stood. Lorien ducked back into the darkness, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Don't be stupid," she told herself, pressing a hand to her chest. "He smells the fear. That's all. He's an Alpha Prime. He probably hears your heartbeat from across the room." She hurried toward the back of the building, toward the heavy oak door of the reserve wine cellar. She didn't see Celestria and Daphnella standing by the cloakroom, watching her retreat with predatory glints in their eyes. "She's heading in," Daphnella whispered, checking her compact mirror to ensure her lipstick was still perfect. "Do you think Niall will really do it? Frame her for theft? It seems mundane." Celestria smirked, smoothing her emerald gown over hips that had launched 1,000 ships and sunk them. "Theft? Oh, darling, Niall doesn't play small games. Theft is just the excuse. By the time the king walks down that hallway, Lorien won't just look like a thief. She'll look like an assassin caught in the act. And the king? He never leaves an assassin alive. The reserve cellar was a library of intoxication. Floor-to-ceiling racks of dusty bottles created a labyrinth of shadows, stretching up into the gloom of the vaulted ceiling. The air here was cool, smelling of cork, old wood, and money. It was silent, insulated from the music upstairs by feet of stone and earth. It felt like a tomb. Lorien moved to Section D, her footsteps echoing softly on the stone floor. She was searching for the blood vintage, checking the tags with trembling fingers. 1940. 1942. "You're early." The voice came from the darkness behind her. Smooth, cultured, predatory. Lorien spun around, clutching the empty silver tray to her chest like a shield. Niall Westgrave emerged from the gloom between two tall racks. He was handsome in the way a poisonous flower is handsome, bright, symmetrical, and deadly. He wore a velvet tuxedo jacket of deep midnight blue, and he held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid, swirling it lazily. "Mr. Westgrave," Lorien said, keeping her voice flat, forcing the tremor out of it. "I was sent for the vintage." "I know," Niall said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "I sent for you." "For the wine," she corrected, stepping back. Her heel hit the bottom shelf of the rack behind her. Trapped. "The wine is a prop, Lorien. Just like this party, just like the king, upstairs." Niall's smile didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, calculating. "I've been watching you. The Wolfless wonder. The girl who smells like nothing." He took a deep breath, inhaling the air around her, his nostrils flaring slightly. "It's unsettling, you know. Every wolf has a scent. Pine, rain, blood, iron, fear. But you're a void. A blank space in the air. It makes people nervous. It makes the king nervous." "I have never met the king," Lorien said, her grip on the tray tightening until her knuckles turned white. "I serve the drinks, Mr. Westgrave. I don't attend the parties. but he knows you exist, or rather, he senses the gap where a person should be. Niall set his glass down on a barrel with a soft clink. There's a rumour, Lorien, an old prophecy in the Westgrave archives, about a child born without the wolf who holds the key to the Alpha's sanity, or his destruction. Lorien laughed, a harsh, dry sound that bounced off the bottles. I'm a waitress, Niall, not a prophecy. I scrub dishes and polish floors. Let me get the wine and leave. I can't do that. Niall's expression hardened, the veneer of civility slipping. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. He tossed it to her. Lorien caught it reflexively. It was heavy. The drawstring loosened, revealing the contents. The king's signet ring, massive, gold, and set with a ruby that looked like a drop of crystallized blood. The one Malric never took off. Stolen an hour ago, Niall whispered, his voice silky, by a clever little thief who used the service corridors to slip into the royal cloakroom. Lorien dropped the pouch as if it burned. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. No, I won't be part of this. I'm leaving. You're not going anywhere, Niall lunged. It wasn't a seduction, it was an assault. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her back with bruising force, slamming her into the wine rack. Bottles rattled ominously, dust raining down on them. Lorien didn't scream. Screaming was for people who expected to be saved. In the orphanage, screaming just told the bullies where you were hiding. She fought. She stomped on his instep, driving her heel down with vicious precision. Niall grunted, his grip loosening just enough. Lorien spun, swinging the heavy silver tray with both hands. It connected with the side of his head with a ringing clang that vibrated up her arms. Niall staggered back, blood trickling from his temple. But instead of anger, he looked delighted. He wiped the blood away and looked at it on his fingers. Feisty. Good. It makes it more believable. What does? Lorien panted, backing away, scanning for a weapon. That you attacked a high-ranking noble when he caught you stealing. Niall flicked the blood onto the floor. Self-defense, naturally. I'll have to kill you to protect the crown's honor. He shifted. It wasn't a full shift. The room was too small, but his eyes turned molten gold, his canines elongated into fangs, and claws burst through the tips of his manicured fingers, shredding the expensive velvet gloves. He swiped at the air, the sound like tearing fabric. Lorien ducked, grabbing the nearest bottle, a Pinot Noir worth more than her life. She smashed it against the wooden rack. Red wine exploded like arterial spray, drenching her grey uniform, soaking into her skin. She held the jagged neck of the bottle out, the glass sharp and deadly. "Stay back," she warned, her voice trembling but her hand steady. "I know where the arteries are, Niall." Niall laughed, a low growl that rumbled in his chest. "You think a piece of glass scares a beta wolf? I heal before you can blink. I think if I sever your jugular, you'll bleed just like a human before you heal," she snarled, the adrenaline turning her vision sharp and high contrast. Niall roared and charged. Lorien didn't retreat. She dropped low, sweeping his legs, a move she'd watched the soldiers practice in the courtyard while she was scrubbing floors, a move she practiced in her room at night. Niall, expecting her to run, was caught off guard. He fell heavily, crashing into a rack of vintage Merlots. Wood splintered, glass shattered. Red wine flooded the floor. Lorien scrambled on top of him, the jagged glass bottle pressed against his throat. She was running on pure adrenaline, her eyes wild, her hair torn loose from its bun, sticking to her face with wine and sweat. "Don't move," she hissed, pressing the glass into his skin, just enough to draw a bead of real blood. "Give me a reason." The heavy oak door to the cellar burst open. The door didn't just open. It slammed against the stone wall with the force of a battering ram. The wood splintered near the hinges. Framed in the doorway, backlit by the harsh hallway lights like a vengeful god, stood King Malric Heartfall. The silence that followed was absolute. The dust motes seemed to freeze in the air. The scene before the king was damning. The room reeked of spilled alcohol, metallic blood, and violence. Niall Westgrave, the heir to one of the most powerful families, was on his back, covered in red liquid that looked horrifyingly like blood. Straddling him, wild-eyed and drenched in the same red substance, was the Omega. She held a jagged glass shank to the throat of a nobleman, her face a mask of desperate fury. Lorien froze. She couldn't breathe. She looked up, her violet eyes meeting the pitch-black gaze of the Alpha King. Malric stepped into the room. His presence was a physical weight, crushing the air out of the cellar. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't look at Niall. He looked only at Lorien. "Well," Malric said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that vibrated in the floorboards and settled in Lorien's chest. "This is not the wine tasting I was promised." Niall, sensing his moment, let out a choked gasp, playing the wounded victim. "My king, help me. She's mad. I caught her with your ring. She tried to kill me." Lorien's hand shook, but she didn't pull the glass away. She couldn't. If she let go, Niall would kill her before the king could intervene. "He's lying," she whispered, her voice rough. She knew how it looked. The stolen ring was on the floor, glinting in the puddle of wine, like a guilty verdict. Malric walked forward, his movements slow, deliberate, like a tiger circling a trap. He stopped 2 feet away from them. The scent of him, rain on hot pavement, ozone, and raw, terrifying power, overwhelmed the smell of the wine. It made Lorien's head spin. "Get up, Westgrave," Malric commanded. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The voice was laced with alpha authority, a compulsion that usually forced submission instantly. "I can't, sire," Niall wheezed, resisting the command with effort, playing the injury. "She has a knife to my throat." Malric tilted his head, studying Lorien. He looked at the jagged bottle in her hand, then at the ring on the floor, then at her eyes. He seemed to be searching for something. Fear, guilt, submission. "You," Malric said to Lorien, "drop the glass." "He'll kill me," Lorien said, her voice barely audible. She didn't drop it. She defied a direct order from the king. Malric's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "If you don't drop it, I will kill you," Malric stated. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. "And I will be much faster." Lorien held his gaze for a second that felt like an eternity. She saw something in the abyss of his eyes. Not anger, but curiosity. A cold, calculating intelligence that mirrored her own. She released the bottle. It shattered on the stone floor. Before she could blink, Niall moved. With a snarl of triumph, he surged upward, his claws aiming for Lorien's stomach, intending to gut her before the king could speak. Crack! The sound was sickeningly loud, bone against bone. Lorien flinched, expecting pain, but nothing happened. She opened her eyes. King Malric had moved faster than thought. He had caught Niall's wrist in mid-air, his grip so tight that Niall's bones ground together audibly. Malric wasn't looking at Niall. He was still staring at Lorien, his expression unreadable. "I gave an order," Malric said softly to Niall, though his eyes never left Lorien's face. "I said get up. I did not say execute the prisoner." Niall whimpered, shifting back to human form as the pain registered, his arm dangling uselessly in the king's grip. "Sire, she stole your signet. Look, it's right there." Malric released Niall's hand with a shove that sent the beta stumbling back into the wine racks. The king bent down and picked up the heavy gold ring from the puddle of wine. He wiped it on his tuxedo pants, uncaring of the stain on the expensive fabric. "So it is," Malric mused. He slid the ring onto his finger, twisting it, settled. Then he looked at Lorien again. "You, the Wolfless one. Drifters, is it?" Driftwood, she corrected, surprised her voice worked at all. She stood up, her legs trembling, trying to regain some dignity despite being covered in wine and sweat. She squared her shoulders. Driftwood. Malric stepped closer. He was massive, towering over her. He leaned in, his nose brushing the shell of her ear. He inhaled deeply. Lorien froze. This was it. He would smell the fear. He would smell the adrenaline. Malric pulled back, a frown creasing his forehead. Nothing, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Absolute silence. It's quiet. "Sire, arrest her!" Niall shouted, regaining his composure, holding his bruised wrist. "She attacked a noble. That is treason. The law demands blood." Malric turned to Niall. The boredom was gone from his face, replaced by a sharp, lethal focus. "She attacked a noble who entered a secure room with a waitress and locked the door from the inside." Niall paled. I was interrogating her." "In the dark?" Malric raised an eyebrow. "Niall, your methods are as sloppy as your combat skills. Look at her." He gestured to Lorien. "She weighs 110 pounds soaking wet, has no wolf, and yet you are the one bleeding from the head." Malric turned back to Lorien. The air between them crackled with an unseen energy. "You are under arrest, Lorien Driftwood," Malric said, but his tone lacked the finality of a death sentence. "For theft, for assault, and for ruining a vintage I was actually looking forward to." He reached out. Lorien flinched, expecting cuffs, expecting pain. Instead, Malric's large, warm hand wrapped around her upper arm. His grip was firm but surprisingly gentle, stabilizing her. However, Malric addressed the doorway, where his personal guards were now crowding in, weapons drawn. "She is a high-risk prisoner. No one speaks to her. No one touches her. She goes directly to my private wing." "Your private wing?" Niall sputtered. "Sire, the dungeon is standard protocol. The council will not like—" Malric smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Lorien had ever seen. It was a smile full of teeth and bad intentions. "I am the king, Niall. I am the protocol." Malric pulled Lorien against his side. "And I want to know how a girl with no wolf managed to take down my best hunter. Walk, Driftwood." As Malric marched her out of the cellar, past the stunned guards and the gaping, bloody face of Niall Westgrave, Lorien realized two things. First, she wasn't going to die tonight. Second, she had just become the most dangerous piece on the board, and she had no idea how to play the game. "Don't trip," Malric whispered into her hair as they entered the bright hallway, the music from the party swelling around them. "Everyone is watching. Give them a show." Lorien lifted her chin, her violet eyes burning. If she was going to be a prisoner, she would be a queen of prisoners. She matched his stride, and for the first time in history, the Alpha King walked out of a party not with a queen, but with a blood-soaked waitress, leaving a trail of questions and red wine in their wake. The king's private wing was less a prison and more a fortress of solitude, carved from obsidian and regret. The floors were black marble, so polished they looked like dark water, reflecting the vaulted ceilings above. The walls were adorned not with the triumphant portraits of past kings, but with ancient, fading tapestries depicting the First War of the Shifters, scenes of carnage, fire, and the cost of the crown. It was silent here. Dead silent. The ambient thrum of the palace, the distant chatter of servants, the electrical hum of security. It all died at the heavy oak threshold. Malric shoved the heavy double doors of his study open with a casual strength that made the hinges groan. He pulled Lorien inside, his grip firm but impersonal, like he was handling a volatile chemical rather than a woman. He released her arm immediately, walking over to a massive mahogany desk that looked like it had been carved from the hull of a shipwreck. He didn't look at her. He moved to a crystal decanter, the cut glass catching the low light of the fire, and poured 2 generous measures of an amber liquid that smelled of burnt sugar and peat. "Drink," he ordered, holding one out without turning around, his back a wall of black tuxedo wool. Lorien stood by the door, hugging her wine-soaked arms. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, clammy residue of shock. The smell of the drying Pinot Noir on her uniform was cloying and sickening. "Is it poisoned?" Malric turned slowly, a flicker of dark amusement dancing in his abyssal eyes. "If I wanted you dead, Driftwood, I would have let Niall finish his swing. It would have been cleaner. Less paperwork." He gestured with the glass. "Drink. It's a 50-year-old brandy from the Highlands. It will stop your hands from shaking, or at least make you care less that they are." Lorien hesitated, then stepped forward and took the glass. Her hands were indeed shaking, the crystal rattling against her teeth as she took a sip. She downed the burning liquid in one gulp. It hit her stomach like a fireball, searing through the numbness, clearing the fog of adrenaline with a sharp, alcoholic slap. "Sit," Malric commanded, pointing to a velvet armchair that looked large enough to swallow her whole. She sat, perching on the edge of the cushion, refusing to relax. Her legs felt like jelly, but her spine remained rigid. Malric leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. The tuxedo jacket strained against his biceps, the fabric protesting the muscle beneath. He watched her for a long minute, the silence stretching until it was physical, a taut wire between them. "Why didn't you scream?" he asked finally, his voice low, devoid of the theatricality he had used in the cellar. "Screaming annoys the predators," Lorien said automatically, staring into the empty glass. It was a lesson she'd learned in the orphanage, etched into her by years of dodging beatings. "It triggers the chase instinct. If you run, they chase. If you scream, they bite. If you stay still, sometimes they forget you're there." Malric's eyes narrowed, the gold flecks in his irises shifting like turning gears. "Smart. Most Omegas. Most people forget that. They panic. They flail. You didn't panic. You calculated." "I panicked," Lorien argued, looking up at him. "I broke a bottle of priceless Pinot Noir. My hands are still sticky with it. You broke the bottle to create a weapon, not out of clumsiness. And you aimed for the jugular." Malric tilted his head, studying her like a biological anomaly. "Niall is a beta prime. He heals fast, but a severed jugular slows anyone down. You knew exactly where to cut. Who taught you to fight?" "No one," she said defensively. "I watch. I listen. When you are invisible, people do things in front of you that they shouldn't. I've seen the soldiers train in the courtyards while I wash the windows. I've seen the drunks brawl in the alley behind the kitchen. Violence has a rhythm. You just have to find the offbeat." Malric stood up and walked toward her. He moved with a predatory grace, silent on the marble. He moved into her personal space, forcing her to look up at him, placing a hand on either arm of the chair, boxing her in. The scent of him, rain, ozone, and something darker, like gunpowder, flooded her senses. "That's the thing, Lorien. You aren't invisible to me. You are loud." "Loud?" She blinked, confused. "Niall said I was silent, a void, a nothing." "To a wolf, yes. You have no scent signature. It's like looking at a hole in the world. But that absence, it's deafening." His voice dropped to a rumble that vibrated in her chest. "It's the only quiet thing in my life. Do you know what it's like to be an alpha king? I hear everything. The heartbeat of the guard at the door. The pheromones of the maid 3 rooms away who is afraid she'll be fired. The ambition dripping off my advisors like sweat. It is a constant, screaming noise of desire and fear." He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "But you? You are just... you. A blank page." Silence. He reached out, his fingers grazing her jawline. His skin was rough, calloused from years of swordplay and shifting. Lorien held her breath, The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her that had nothing to do with fear, a sharp, sudden awareness of his heat. "Did you take the ring?" he asked softly, watching her pupils dilate. "No." "I believe you." "Just like that?" Lorien asked, skeptical. "I was found over the body of a noble, with the stolen goods at my feet. Niall Westgrave is ambitious, but he is a terrible actor. He reeks of desperation. And you—" Malric's thumb brushed her cheek, wiping away a smear of dried wine with surprising tenderness. "You have the eyes of someone who hates owing anyone anything. Theft implies you wanted something of mine. You look like you want nothing to do with me." "I don't," Lorien lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I want to go back to the kitchen. I have a shift tomorrow." Malric laughed, a genuine low sound that transformed his face, making him look younger, less like a statue of war. "Too late. You threatened a high lord. You drew royal blood, even if it was just Niall's. If I send you back, you'll be dead by morning. An accident in the scullery involving a very sharp knife. So I'm a prisoner? You are a guest under protective custody." Malric straightened up, moving away from her. The loss of his warmth was sudden and jarring, leaving the air cold again. "But to the world, to the Westgraves, you are my prisoner. It's the only way to keep Niall's father from demanding your head immediately. We have to play a game, Lorien, a very dangerous one." "I don't know the rules," she whispered. "Then learn fast," Malric said, walking to the door. "Tonight, you sleep here. The sofa is comfortable enough. Tomorrow we go to the estate. We need to find out why the Wolfless girl is the only one in the kingdom who isn't afraid of the Alpha King." The next morning, the capital was buzzing with rumors of the mad waitress and the stolen ring. But Lorien was miles away, high in the Frost Peak Mountains at the Heartfall estate. She was awakened not by a guard, but by the smell of lavender and antiseptic. An older woman with silver hair tied in a loose braid and kind, crinkled eyes was pulling back the heavy velvet curtains. Sunlight flooded the room, blindingly bright against the pristine snow outside. "Up you get, child," the woman said briskly. "I'm Brianna, the estate's healer, and you, apparently, are the reason I didn't get to sleep last night." Lorien sat up, disoriented. The room was massive, the bed sheets made of silk that felt like water. "Where is the king?" "In the library. Brooding, it's his favorite hobby." Brianna pointed to a dress laid out on the chaise lounge. It wasn't a servant's uniform. It was a structured wool dress in deep charcoal, high-necked, long-sleeved, and elegant in a severe, commanding way. He said to wear this. "I can't wear that," Lorien said, shrinking back. "It looks expensive. People like me don't wear clothes like that. We wash them." "It's warm," Brianna countered, brooking no argument. "The heating is spotty in the library, and Malric refuses to fix it because he likes the cold." "Put it on. In this house, you do what Malric says, mostly to keep him from growling at the staff." Lorien dressed, the fabric soft and heavy against her skin. It fit perfectly, which was unsettling. She felt like an imposter, a child playing dress-up in a queen's armor. She checked herself in the mirror. The wine was gone from her hair, leaving it pale and clean, but her eyes were still haunted. She walked down the grand staircase, guided by Brianna, her footsteps muffled by thick carpets. The house was beautiful, but empty, devoid of the personal touches that made a place a home. It felt like a museum. Malric was in the library, a 2-story room filled with the smell of old paper and wood smoke. But he wasn't alone. A tall, striking woman with hair like burnished copper and features sharp enough to cut glass stood by the fireplace. She wore emerald green silk that clashed violently with the rustic setting. Celestria, the daughter of the Southern Alpha, the king's intended mate, At least that's what the tabloids said. Celestria turned as Lorien entered. Her gaze was a physical blow, withering and full of aristocratic disdain. She looked Lorien up and down, lingering on the expensive dress. "So," Celestria drawled, her voice like poisoned honey, "this is the little assassin. She cleans up well, though you can still smell the bleach." "She is not an assassin, Celestria," Malric said from his desk. He didn't look up from a stack of documents, but his shoulders were tense. "She is a witness who smells like nothing." Celestria wrinkled her nose, stepping closer to Lorien, circling her like a shark. "It's unnatural, Malric. It makes my skin crawl. It's like standing next to a corpse. She shouldn't be here. She should be in the containment cells. Niall is furious. His father is demanding a tribunal by noon." "Let them demand," Malric said, finally looking up. His eyes locked on Lorien. He didn't smile, but the hard line of his jaw softened imperceptibly. "Come here, Lorien." Lorien walked past Celestria, feeling the woman's hatred radiating off her like heat from a furnace. She stopped in front of the desk, keeping her hands clasped to hide the tremor. "Brianna tells me you have no scars," Malric said, dropping a file onto the desk. Lorien frowned. "I have plenty. Burn on my arm from the oven, scar on my knee from—" "Not human scars," Malric interrupted. "Wolf scars. No bite marks from rough play as a pup. No transformation, tears in the skin. You truly never shifted?" "Never. The moon comes and goes, the bones ache, but I just stay me." Malric stood and walked around the desk. He took her hand, turning it palm up. "Brianna took a blood sample while you slept. Do you know what we found?" Lorien pulled her hand back, anger flaring. "You drugged me." "We sedated you. You were in shock, bordering on cardiac stress." Malric ignored her indignation, stepping closer. "Your blood doesn't have the lupus strain. It lacks the shifting enzyme entirely. But it has something else. Traces of something older." "Older?" Celestria scoffed from the fireplace. "She's a genetic defect, Malric. Don't romanticize it." "She's a mule." "Silverbane," Malric said, the word heavy in the air. He ignored Celestria completely. "It's a bloodline thought extinct. Your blood contains a natural resistance to the Alpha Command. It acts as a shield. That's why you didn't freeze when I entered the cellar. That's why you don't flinch when I use the voice. That's why you can lie to me, and I can't smell the pheromones." Lorien stared at him. The Alpha Command was absolute. It was the biological imperative that kept the packs in line. When an Alpha spoke with power, wolves obeyed. It wasn't a choice. It was gravity. I just thought I was stubborn," Lorien whispered. "You are immune," Malric said, a strange intensity in his voice, a mixture of awe and fear. "Do you understand what that means? In a world of wolves governed by instinct and command, you are the only one who can truly say no to me. You are the only free will in the kingdom." "And that makes her dangerous," Celestria hissed, her eyes flashing green. "If the council finds out there's a breed that ignores the command, every rebel in the territories will want her blood, or they'll want to breed her." "Then the monarchy falls," Malric finished, his gaze intense. He looked at Lorien not as a subject, but as a variable that had changed the entire equation. "Or it changes." Suddenly, the air in the room shifted. A high-pitched whine, barely audible, pressed against the glass. Malric's head snapped toward the window. "Down!" The warning came a fraction of a second too late. The massive, floor-to-ceiling windows of the library didn't just break, they exploded inward. A concussion grenade detonated just outside the glass, turning the window pane into a storm of razor-sharp shrapnel. "Get down!" Malric roared. He didn't shift, it would take too long, and the furniture was in the way. He tackled Lorien, his heavy body slamming into hers, driving the air from her lungs. He covered her with his own bulk, shielding her as shards of glass chewed up the mahogany desk and embedded themselves in the Persian rugs. "Assassins!" Celestria screamed, diving behind a heavy leather sofa, her elegance vanishing into panic. Metal canisters hissed as they skidded across the floor, spinning and spewing thick, white gas. Malric rolled, dragging Lorien with him behind the heavy oak overturn of the desk. The room was filling with the white smoke rapidly. The acrid, metallic sting of wolfsbane hit Lorien's throat. "They found us fast," Malric coughed, his eyes watering immediately. He tried to push himself up, but his arms trembled. Wolfsbane. It was the kryptonite of their kind. It weakened the wolf, severed the connection to the strength, and caused agonizing pain. Lorien looked at him. He was wheezing, veins turning black under the skin of his neck. "It's wolfsbane," she realized, covering her nose with her sleeve. She took a deep breath. It burned, making her eyes water, but her muscles didn't lock. Her heart didn't stutter. "I'm immune. It's just pepper spray to me." "Get out," Malric gasped, his hand gripping her shoulder, his nails digging in. "Run, Lorien, leave me." "No." Lorien looked around the edge of the desk. Through the swirling white fog, she saw the tactical movement of shadows. 3 men in full tactical gear, gas masks hiding their faces. They moved with the fluid grace of wolves, but they carried human weapons, suppressed rifles and tranquilizer darts. "Can you stand?" she asked Malric. "Barely," he growled, fighting the paralysis, sweat beading on his forehead. "Then stay down. Be the king later. Right now, be quiet." Lorien didn't run away. She ran out. She stayed low, below the thickest part of the smoke line. The wolfless disadvantage was suddenly her greatest weapon. The attackers were relying on thermal sights and scent to track targets in the smoke. But the wolfsbane gas messed with their olfactory senses, and Lorien was a ghost. She had no heat spikes from a shifting metabolism. She had no scent of fear. She moved through the library stacks like a shadow. The first attacker was scanning the room, his rifle raised. He didn't see her until she was already there. She grabbed a heavy brass letter opener from the scattered debris of the desk, a jagged piece of metal. She didn't hesitate. She jammed it into the weak point of his armor, the gap between the vest and the neck protection. He gurgled, shock registering in his eyes behind the mask, and dropped. She grabbed his sidearm, a tranquilizer pistol loaded with liquid silver. The second attacker turned at the sound of the body falling. He saw a shape in the smoke, but he hesitated, confused by the lack of wolf readings. That hesitation cost him. Lorien fired. The dart hit him in the thigh. He dropped, convulsing as the silver hit his bloodstream. The third attacker roared, tearing off his mask. He realized the tech was failing. He shifted, his body cracking and reshaping into a massive grey wolf, intending to tear through the smoke with brute force. He lunged toward the desk, toward Malric. Lorien had nowhere to go. She raised her arms, bracing for the impact, knowing she couldn't stop a shifted wolf with a letter opener. A blur of black fur collided with the grey wolf in midair. Malric. He had shifted. Despite the poison coursing through his veins, despite the agony that must have been tearing him apart, he had forced the change. The two beasts crashed into the bookcases, a tangle of teeth and claws. Books rained down like confetti. Malric was larger, darker, a creature of nightmare and shadow. But he was slow, the poison dragging at his limbs. The grey wolf snapped at Malric's throat. Malric twisted, using his weight to pin the attacker. With a savage, guttural roar that shook the walls, he tore the attacker's throat out in one motion. Silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of a fire started by a flashbang and the heavy, wet breathing of the king. Malric shifted back, collapsing onto the floor among the ruined books. He was naked, shivering violently, his skin pale and veined with the black web of the poison. Lorien dropped the gun and ran to him. "Malric!" She fell to her knees, pulling his head into her lap, ignoring the blood and the glass. He was burning up, his body fighting a war on a cellular level. "Brianna!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "We need help!" Malric's eyes fluttered open. They were hazy, unfocused, the gold fading to a dull mud color. He looked up at her, at the girl in the ruined charcoal dress who had just taken down 2 armed soldiers while he was incapacitated. "You stayed," he rasped, blood staining his teeth. "Why?" "I told you," Lorien said, brushing the damp hair from his forehead, her hand trembling now that the danger was over. "I don't like owing people. You saved me in the cellar. Now we're even." Malric tried to laugh, but it turned into a hacking cough that brought up black bile. He gripped her hand, his strength failing, but his hold desperate. "Not even close, Driftwood. Not even close." As the estate guards finally burst into the room, weapons drawn, led by a panicked Brianna, Lorien looked up. Celestria emerged from behind the sofa, her dress spotless, her face pale. She looked at the dead assassins, then at Lorien holding the king. Her expression wasn't relief. It was calculation. "You idiot!" Celestria whispered, her voice cutting through the noise of the arriving guards. "You just doomed us all. If you had let him die, the Westgraves would have stopped. Now it's a war." Lorien tightened her grip on Malric's hand. "Then let them come. The fallout was catastrophic. The media didn't just report it, they devoured it. They called it the Heartfall Siege. Niall Westgrave went on every news channel, his handsome face bruised just enough to garner sympathy, claiming the king was unstable, harboring a dangerous, non-wolf radical who had attacked his security detail with unregistered chemical weapons. The narrative was flipped perfectly. Malric was the erratic tyrant seduced by a terrorist. Lorien was the monster in the shadows. Malric was confined to the medical wing for 3 days, his body fighting the lingering necrosis of the wolfsbane. When he emerged, he was thinner, his cheekbones sharper, but his rage was a cold, palpable thing that made the air in the estate drop 10 degrees. He found Lorien in the greenhouse, staring at the winter roses that bloomed despite the frost. She hadn't changed out of the ruined charcoal dress. It was a badge of survival now. "We have to leave," he said, skipping the pleasantries. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding on glass. "The council has voted. They stripped me of emergency powers an hour ago. They are demanding I hand you over to the enforcers for questioning. And by questioning, they mean vivisection." Lorien turned. She looked tired, dark circles bruising the skin under her violet eyes. "Then hand me over. Don't be stupid." Malric walked to her, invading her space, his heat radiating against the cold glass of the greenhouse. "If I hand you over, you die, and if you die, I will burn this kingdom to ash. I will tear the throat out of every council member until the rivers run red." The raw, unhinged emotion in his voice stopped her. It wasn't just duty. It wasn't just the obsession of a predator with a new puzzle. It was something human. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am nothing, Malric. I am a glitch in the bloodline, a waitress who knows how to hold a knife. You are the king. You are the only person who sees me," he said fiercely, grabbing her shoulders. "Not the crown. Not the alpha. Me." When the gas hit, when I was lying on the floor, choking on my own bile, you didn't look at me with pity. You didn't look at me with fear. You looked at me like a partner, like an equal. I can't rule without that. I don't want to rule without that. He reached out, cupping her face with hands that could crush stone, but were trembling now. He leaned in, and this time there was no hesitation. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle fairy tale kiss. It was desperate, tasting of iron and ash and longing. It was a collision of 2 lonely people who had found the only other person in the world who understood the silence. Lorien melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt, anchoring herself against the storm of him. For a moment, the politics, the wolves, the danger, it all vanished. There was only the heat of him, the solid reality of the king who wanted the wolfless girl. But the moment shattered with the wail of sirens cutting through the mountain air. "They're here." Malric pulled back, breathless, his eyes flashing gold. Niall brought the enforcers. He bypassed the local guard. "You can't fight them all," Lorien said, hearing the heavy thud of boots on the gravel outside. "I can try. I can take at least 50 of them before I go down." "No." Lorien stepped back, her mind racing, the strategic gears turning faster than fear. "If you fight the enforcers, you prove Niall right. You become the Mad King, attacking his own police force. You lose the people. You lose the throne." "So what do I do?" Malric roared, frustration making the glass panes rattle. "Watch them drag you away?" "You let me surrender," Lorien said calmly, "publicly, under the ancient laws." "What laws? The Omega Code? That just guarantees you a silent execution." "The law of the Silver Truth," she corrected. "An Omega can demand a public trial if accused of treason by a High Lord. It hasn't been used in centuries because Omegas are usually too scared to speak, and the burden of proof is fatal." "You aren't an Omega," Malric realized, his eyes widening. "Legally I am. The registry lists me as Omega deficient, and legally they have to grant it. If I invoke the Silver Truth, Niall has to face me in the circle. Not combat. Testimony. Under the serum of veracity." "It's a trap," Malric warned. "The serum doesn't work on betas like it does on alphas. He can fight it." "Yes," Lorien smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile that mirrored the one he had given her in the cellar. "But he thinks I'm nothing. He thinks I'm a scared little girl. It is a trap, Malric, but it's my trap." The trial was not held in a courtroom. The Westgraves, arrogant in their victory, demanded it be held at the Blood Moon Gala a week later. They wanted a spectacle. They wanted to humiliate the king and execute his pet in front of the elite, broadcasting the restoration of order to the entire nation. The ballroom of the Gilded Claw was packed. The air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and bloodlust. This time, Lorien didn't enter through the service door. She didn't carry a tray. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, and silence fell like a guillotine. She wore white, a stark, blinding white silk gown that flowed like water, with a high neck and long sleeves, unadorned by jewelry. It was a statement. In a room of wolves wearing fur, velvet, and the colors of their houses, she was the moon itself. She was a blank canvas. Niall stood on the dais, smug and preening in a crimson tuxedo. Celestria stood beside him, having switched sides the moment the wind changed, looking at Lorien with a mixture of hatred and fear. "Lorien Driftwood," Niall announced, his voice amplified, booming through the hall. "You stand accused of attempted assassination, theft of royal property, and bewitching the king with chemical agents. You have invoked the Silver Truth. Do you understand that if you are found lying, the penalty is death by the pack?" Lorien walked to the center of the circle. The floor was inlaid with the silver moon crest. She stood on the eye of the wolf. Malric stood at the edge of the circle, his hands clenched into fists, restrained by 4 enforcers and the ancient laws of the trial. He looked ready to rip the throat out of the world. "I understand," Lorien said, her voice clear, amplified by the acoustics of the room. "How do you plead?" Niall sneered. "I plead competency," Lorien said. Laughter rippled through the crowd, a nervous, titillating sound. "Competency?" Niall laughed, playing to the crowd. "You are a broken thing, a genetic dead end. You worked in a kitchen." "Am I?" Lorien reached into the pocket of her gown. She pulled out a small, sealed vial. "This is the poison used in the gas attack at the estate. I synthesized the residue found on my dress." The crowd murmured. It is a proprietary blend, Lorien continued, her voice gaining steel. Wolfsbane mixed with a neurotoxin derived from the blue orchid. The blue orchid only grows in one private greenhouse in this city. She turned to Celestria. Yours, Lady Celestria. Celestria paled, her hand going to her throat. Lies! She planted it. Is it? Lorien turned back to the crowd, pacing the circle. Niall claims I attacked him in the cellar. But the cellar logs show the security cameras were turned off by him 10 minutes before I arrived. Why would a victim disable the cameras? Technical malfunction! Niall shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. And finally, Lorien stopped in front of Niall, looking up at him on the dais. The king's ring. You said I stole it. You said I held it. But the ring has a biometric lock. If anyone but a Heartfall touches it for more than 10 seconds, it emits a distress signal. If I had stolen it, the guards would have been alerted instantly. They weren't. She turned to Malric. Sire, check the logs of your ring. Play them for the court. Malric stepped forward, shaking off the enforcers. A savage grin broke onto his face. He raised his hand and tapped the signet ring. A holographic projection sprang up in the center of the room. Log entry, removed by wearer. Location, coat check. Time, 1900. Status, inactive until retrieval. By N. Westgrave at 1915. Biometric warning. Override, authorized by N. Westgrave using security clearance, Beta 1. The silence in the room was absolute. The hologram hovered there, a damning neon accusation. I didn't take it, Malric said, his voice booming like thunder. I left it in my coat. Niall Westgrave retrieved it. He staged the theft. He staged the attack. He staged the coup. The crowd turned on Niall. The wolves could smell the deceit now. The pheromones of a liar were acrid and sour, flooding the room. She's a witch! Niall screamed, losing his composure, his handsome face twisting into a snarl. She has no wolf. She is an abomination. She tricked the logs. He shifted. It was illegal during a trial. It was a death sentence to shift in the circle of truth. But Niall was past caring. He was a cornered animal. Bones cracked, velvet tore, and a massive russet wolf exploded from the dais, jaws snapping, lunging straight for Lorien's throat. Malric roared, moving to intercept, but he was too far away. The enforcers were too slow. Lorien didn't flinch. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She stood her ground, raised her right hand, palm out, and shouted one word, a word fueled by 22 years of silence, of watching, of knowing exactly how the predator thinks. Sit. It wasn't a request. It wasn't magic. It was pure, unadulterated command. But it didn't come from an alpha. It came from something outside the hierarchy. To a wolf, instinct is everything. When an alpha commands, they obey. But when the void commands, when the silence speaks, it is terrifying. Niall's wolf faltered in mid-air. Confused by a prey that acted like a god, his instinct misfired. His brain short-circuited. He skidded to a halt, whining, his belly scraping the floor. In that second of hesitation, Malric arrived. He didn't shift. He didn't need to. He simply punched the wolf in the jaw with the force of a freight train. There was a sickening crunch. Niall crumbled, unconscious before he hit the floor, sliding to Lorien's feet. The ballroom was chaotic, shouts and screams echoing off the crystal chandeliers, but the center of the room was the eye of the hurricane. Calm. Still. Malric stood over Niall's broken body, his chest heaving. He looked at the crowd, daring anyone to move. Then he turned to Lorien. He looked at her white dress, untouched by blood this time. He looked at her face, fierce and alive. Slowly, deliberately, the Alpha King dropped to one knee. Gasps echoed through the hall. An Alpha King never kneeled, not to a council, not to a god, and certainly not to an Omega. You didn't need me, Malric said, his voice carrying through the stunned silence. He sounded awed, terrified, and hopelessly in love. "You handled the room. You handled the evidence. You handled the wolf." "I needed you to punch him," Lorien admitted, her adrenaline crashing, her knees shaking under the silk. "My hand hurts just looking at him. And I needed you to trust me." Malric took her hand, the one that had stopped a wolf, and kissed her knuckles. "The law says the winner of the trial determines the fate of the loser. What is your judgment?" Lorien looked down at Niall, then at Celestria, who was being handcuffed by the very enforcers she had summoned. "Exile," Lorien said softly. "We don't kill them. Death is too easy. Let them live as outcasts. Let them wander the edges of the territory. Let them see what it's like to be invisible. Let them see what it's like to be nothing." She looked at Malric, her violet eyes shining with tears she refused to shed. "And as for the laws, they change. Tonight. No more Wolfless caste. No more Omegas by default. Value is determined by action, not biology. If they can fight, they fight. If they can think, they lead." Malric stood up, pulling her close, wrapping his arms around her waist, as if he intended to never let go. "As the Queen commands." "I'm not Queen," Lorien protested, resting her forehead against his chest. "I'm just the waitress who knew where the security cameras were." "We can fix that," Malric murmured, leaning down to kiss her, right there in front of the stunned nobility, the paparazzi, and the world. "I propose a new title. The Alpha's Equal." Lorien smiled, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. She felt infinite. Lorien Driftwood proved that power is not about the claws you possess, but the spine you keep straight when the world tries to break it. She and King Malric didn't just rule the kingdom, they dismantled it, and built something better. A world where strength was measured in character, not just in blood. They were the wolf and the witness, a balance of instinct and intellect that ushered in a golden age. If you enjoyed this story of defiance, romance, and justice, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of underdogs who become legends. Remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the cards.